This year, our forum will focus on climate change and the challenges which are facing Africa.
Less than 3% of greenhouse gas emissions are emitted from Africa, and yet, as we always hear, the people of the continent are actually bearing a disproportionate burden.
The drought, the vulnerable community, the food insecurity on the continent, and that makes it extremely difficult for Africa to build its resilience.
There's a lot of doom and gloom. And while that is an important conversation to have, I think what's more important is to highlight the small and impactful ways Africans are making change in the continent.
If we have more African voices speaking about climate change and how it impacts them on an everyday basis, real African stories, I hope that would move our leaders.
The national governments need to step up and be more forward-leaning in terms of not just asking for humanitarian support, but looking at medium-term measures to build resilience.
In 6 months, COP27 will convene in Africa, and we need a coherent voice for Africa in Sharm el-Sheikh.
If we don't set the agenda, somebody will set it for us. And time has come for Africa to set the agenda.
You have the chairmanship of the African Union. We are really talking to Africa now.
L'Afrique, quant à elle, qui a la moitié de sa population, 600 millions de personnes, qui n'a pas accès à l'électricité, alors si on nous dit privez-vous, n'utilisez pas les ressources naturelles que vous avez, c'est vraiment injuste.
The industrialized countries does not have the moral authority on issues related to climate change. They are 100% responsible on this global warming, and the South is paying the high price and suffer the most of the consequences.
Before you go to COP27, we haven't seen any conversations taking place at that level, right?
So we have one now.
We have one now, fortunately.
We really need this young generation to organize and really change the continent, because all generations failed, obviously.
Most of the interventions that are being implemented in African countries, it's like an imposition. So we really need to, first of all, try to understand the socio-cultural dynamics at a household level.
The solution cannot come from development bank alone, but also cannot come from government. We should work together, not only with the private sector, but also with the civil society.
What the ideal thing would be, in my view, in Africa is a demand-driven energy transition. We need to give people the tools in order to make the decision.
So let us not talk about energy equality, but let's talk about equity.
How can Africa leverage its vast green and blue wealth in the global fight against climate change?
We need to move from the mentality of being a victim into the actual sovereign owners of assets that are benefiting the world.
We have incredible hydro resources, we have geothermal resources, we have wind resources. Those are just the renewable sources.
If we're able to put a price to our carbon tonnage, we will be able to create 186 million jobs for the continent.
So you were talking about adding value to Africa's resources, and I've been hearing this since I was a child. I'm sure every one of us here knows that. So why are we not doing that? Why are we still having this conversation in 2022?
This conversation that we're having is supposed to be raw material for African leaders to jointly have one narrative for negotiation with the world at COP27.
COP27, which is a COP for the world, but indeed it's a COP for Africa.
We're not asking for the right to pollute, we're asking for the right to develop.
Gas is green, gas is just, and Africa needs it for its transition.
There is always a big gap between talking and executing, and we need to execute now.
We're part of the solution on this journey. Why? Because we're already providing most of the offsets today.
So we call it the handover session, because we're handing over this session now to our friends and colleagues in Egypt, for whom we have our best wishes for a successful conference.
Thank you very much, Mo. But I really like if you allow me to go back to the young gentleman. I'd like to hear from him.
The young people need to be right there at COP27 doing the same thing they did here. When someone speaks, they raise their hand and say, I don't think that's going to work.
and everyone has to be around the table, and everyone has to be heard in the way of real actions on the ground. And we welcome you all and waiting for you all to be part of the COP27